All right. Well, once again, welcome everybody to this Learn Live session here on Microsoft Ignite. My name is Brian, and I'm going to be one of the presenters here along with Dwayne, and we're going to be talking about automating the deployment of SAP on Azure. As you can see there, both Dwayne and I have a number of years of experience with Microsoft, and we're happy to be here to give you this overview. And it is a jam-packed 60 minutes. So, Dwayne, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, great to be here with you, Brian, and great to be part of the Learn Live sessions. Hopefully, you've enjoyed. I believe that we're the last of the Learn Live sessions, so we're batting towards the end of the lineup or cleanup or whatever you want to call it, and bringing it on home. But hopefully, you've enjoyed many of these sessions. These sessions have been recorded and will be on demand. So if you missed any of them, go back to the session catalog, add them to your backpack. You can also follow along the presentation that we're providing you with here today is actually a live session of the Learn modules that are on Microsoft Learn. So this QR code and this aka.ms link will take you to the modules in Microsoft Learn, as with all of the sessions, and it's really just a time to interact and to get a level of understanding around these great Microsoft Learn modules. So we're really looking forward to the next hour and going through this with you.
Awesome. So as we mentioned pre-start here, we do have three moderators. We have Elkhan, Sanjay, and Imoh here with us today. So they'll be answering your questions. So make sure you say hi to them in the chat, and make sure that you keep them busy. If you see something that we're doing that you want a little more elaboration on or have a question, please don't hesitate to quickly ask that, because they'll be happy to jump in and see if they can help you, or call our attention to things as well if there's more things we need to go on talk a little more in depth about. So, and again, you can find all the stuff that we're doing today for the automate deployment of SAP on Azure at that aka.ms Learn Live link, and that QR code should take you there as well. And you can see that there's 7 units. It's about 42 minutes of material, and we're going to go basically through what you would see there kind of live today. We have pre-prepared some of it so that we don't have to make you watch deployments in Azure that take a long time. But hopefully you'll get the gist of it. And then if you go back and do it again on your own after this, you will have seen it at least once, and it kind of make more sense to you if this is new.
Yeah, the great thing about this particular session is exactly that. You go through the Learn Live sessions, and Microsoft's done a great job of making a lot of these modules with a hands-on level of objectives to help you get some hands-on experience. There's cloud sandboxes in a lot of the Learn modules now. They just recently launched those additional skilling labs that are really cool around different things. I don't think there's one on SAP yet, but maybe eventually. But what we're going to hit here today is really those key modules within Microsoft Learn of describing the Azure tools built in as well as external for deploying SAP, how to use ARM templates to deploy Azure infrastructure for SAP, and also using tools like Terraform and Ansible to deploy that SAP infrastructure. Just keep in mind, we're not going to tell you how to configure SAP or how to configure a HANA database for SAP. It's strictly the infrastructure that we're covering here today. So if you need to, as Brian and I were talking about, SAP, if anybody's been around SAP and the actual deployment of SAP. The deployment of the infrastructure is one group of people, and the SAP and SAP HANA configuration is another group of people in most managed service providers. So, and that we are that infrastructure group here today.
Right. Yeah. So the whole idea of this is to give you kind of a high level 50,000 foot view of some of the tools you can use to set up your team for success when needing to actually support an SAP or a HANA implementation. And so we'll get a good chance to see some of those tools in action today. So again, this is live and interactive, so make sure that you reach out when you have questions, and make sure you don't leave here with a question. We want to make sure that you get your questions answered today.
Absolutely.
All right. Yep. So we'll go ahead and dive in here.
Yeah. So SAP, I mean, as we were saying before, this is really going to be the process of deploying an SAP system. What is specific to SAP on Azure in terms of the architecture? It is a IaaS type of a deployment. It's not used. SAP hasn't moved itself to being cloud native and to being platform based completely. The HANA database still has a very specific aspect to how it gets deployed, and that's those are the kind of the key things and the key takeaways and key understandings around an SAP architecture. It's not unlike a typical infrastructure as a service based VM type architecture, except that there are some very specific aspects to deploying an SAP to what the VMs are going to look like for the SAP application as well as the HANA database.
Yeah, Dwayne, so as we're going through this, we're looking to automate these deployments, but one of our biggest concerns is going to be cost, right? So one of the cool things about using these templates is going to be able to help us control that cost, because like you said, some of the resource demands can be pretty heavy and might get quickly out of control if you don't have a little bit of more of a pulse on that. So yeah.
So this is a bit of an eye chart, but this is a reference architecture, a landscape architecture for SAP, SAP HANA, and SAP within here. And there's a link there. We missed the QR code. I'll have to try and get the cup. I did create a QR code. Let's see if I can get that into the chat. I put that in the chat for the moderators. If the moderators could share that with the others, that would be great. With the attendees, that would be awesome. But some key things around the SAP is generally built as an on-premises type build at first, and it's in an on-premises data center. It's then building on that to migrate that and move, especially some of the high-end data that is being ingested. Obviously, there's a large benefit to be able to bring it into a Azure environment and build levels of disaster recovery and high availability, right? SAP is a line of business application to organizations. It's used for procurement. It's used for sales. It's used for inventory, for billing, and all of that all around. So it continues to be a high availability need for customers. So if we're taking it and utilizing it with on-premises users or remote users, ExpressRoute for the infrastructure is very important. Using a hub-based virtual network and bringing in and utilizing these high-end availability to infrastructures within the Azure environment, to be able to scale up and really use the information and build the architecture at a high performance and high availability scale. I worked within an MSP that hosted a lot of SAP infrastructure, and moving it to Azure is a heavy lift. But what we're going to do here, and what Brian's going to demonstrate in a little while, is how tools can be used to automate that deployment and really get that infrastructure ready to go when the actual SAP application people and database people need to get that into the Azure environment.
And Dwayne, do you think that if I'm just setting up Azure to host SAP, do you think that this is kind of like the common layout that I would want, or is this maybe the actual production end goal? Is there a happy medium somewhere between this giant what you said is iChart or whatever, and where you want to maybe start. Is there a lower level than this that you could go with, or is this kind of like if you don't have all these things, you're going to be in bad states?
Now, what I have seen in terms of staged migrations is first and foremost to get the HANA database into Azure, because as you know, I know you have a very strong SQL and database background. That database back end is the lifeblood of the application, right? So,
Right.
So that. I've seen a lot of like stage migrations of let's get the database in there. You have the build an express route from the on-prem infrastructure and really the SAP application front end, so it starts communicating at least to the cloud to some degree, and then you can start moving the applications forward, and then ultimately you can start also building that disaster recovery and that high availability aspect of things pretty easily off of that.
Yeah, and so in addition to this, if you have future questions on that, always go to the Azure Architecture Center as well, where you can find some recommended structures. Even if you're just doing like simple VNets or hub and spoke architectures, it's a great resource for you to find that stuff. Thanks,
yeah, which
Dwayne.
is exactly where that link is from. Yep.
Right. Yep, exactly. Cool. All right, so let's talk about Azure Resource Manager in general and how that kind of plays in with the Azure architectures and ecosystems. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Yep,
so, go ahead.
I mean, obviously, one of the key things that goes along with that reference architecture is, okay, what do we have in terms of templates and ability to deploy these resources? So, using automation obviously is going to maintain a level of consistency. And if there's one thing that you could say about SAP and SAP on Azure is there is a level of consistency to how it should be deployed. So therefore, deploying SAP on Azure for one SAP environment should be very consistent to the others. Like I said, you could build and decide, for those of you that are, consultants and cloud architecture engineers that do deployments for customers, if you build a consistent template, it carries over customer to customer. That it's going to be very prescriptive from a standpoint of what customers need, what SAP requires, because the architectures are being dictated by SAP. There are specifics around SAP of what they require when deploying on Azure or any other hyperscaler for that matter. So you build those templates, you build on ARM or Bicep or whatever it is, you have a consistent and scalable template that you can use that's repeatable.
Yeah, so if you saw that diagram that we just showed, there were quite a few things. And if you imagine, even if you had half of that, trying to replicate what you did from a dev to a production environment and not miss some of the bells and whistles or flipping some of the switches, the confidence that you can get from a consistent deployment using infrastructure as code is going to give you that peace of mind to know that if you push that button, you can actually almost walk away from it and get and feel confident that your stuff is going to get to production the way it should, and without having to worry about, did I forget to enable some private endpoint or something ridiculously minute that if you don't do it, the whole system crashes, right? So absolutely, we want to have that kind of consistency and the ability to repeat it over and over again. And so around those templates, we get the ARM, or basically the Azure Resource Manager ecosystem, and that's what allows us to work with those templates through deployments. You can see there's a number of ways that you can deploy using the portal. You can use the Azure CLI, which you can use within a PowerShell or a Bash terminal. And then you can also use Azure PowerShell with the actual PowerShell commands. And sometimes you will find that you need to run PowerShell commands if you're using like an automation runbook versus the Azure CLI, which works in both. And sometimes, when you're just working in the Cloud Shell, it might be easier to just open up a Bash terminal and do it, which we're going to get to see a bunch of chances to do that. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Dwayne?
Well, I was going to ask. I was going to ask you, what's your preference, Brian? I always like when I'm teaching this that it depends. It depends on where people come from,
Right.
whether they prefer PowerShell or CLI. I'm not a coder myself. I prefer the portal. I'm sorry to those of you that are coders, but
Yeah.
I'm definitely one that does the portal more so than CLI and PowerShell. But yes, I knew you were going to say that you lean to the bash, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So you might be surprised if you know that I'm a .NET developer and I've been a .NET for a long time. You would think PowerShell would be my go-to weapon of choice. I do prefer PowerShell in certain scenarios. Like I said, sometimes it feels like it's required. For example, if I'm doing an automation runbook, it's typically a lot easier to just build PowerShell scripts, right? But if I'm in the Cloud Shell, I've actually found the verbiage and the syntax of the Azure CLI to work very well, and also the fact that I can run that from PowerShell or from the Bash terminal, knowing those commands really well, or understanding that has been the flavor of choice for me, and that's typically where I land. So,
oh, very cool.
Yeah. So the CLI, again, is that cross-platform tool. It gives us the ability to go between the Cloud Shell, either in a Bash or PowerShell terminal, or locally in PowerShell or on a Bash terminal. So you can run it on a Linux box, or you can run it on a Windows box. You can run it from the Cloud Shell. You can, like I said, put some of it, some commands. Typically, again, if I'm doing an automation run book, I'm leaning towards PowerShell. But you can always do scripts from things like a deployment. So like maybe you're building a deployment in a GitHub action. You could run an Azure CLI from there as well.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that you being a .NET developer that you lean to Bash because a lot of times the people that prefer Bash are the people that are Linux based developers. I was doing a class where I was going through PowerShell, and there's a particular person in the class where she was she loved Linux, and I'm like, well, sorry, this is where I'm teaching in PowerShell today.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that's okay. You're going to learn Linux next week.
Right.
Learn CLI a little bit then.
Yeah. And honestly, if you're going to be on the system admin side of things, I think it really kind of behooves you to know both of them, right? Because you're going to have situations where knowing each one is going to be beneficial, or being able to quickly go between them could be a lifesaver for certain things. But yeah, typically the CLI commands are more, they're less verbose. They're more straightforward. It's like AZ group deployment create versus, new AZ resource group deployment or something like that, which is a much longer, more verbose command you would run in Azure PowerShell, or in PowerShell, excuse me. So cool. So around all of that, of course, PowerShell does give us the ability to do all the commands we need to do, and they are specifically labeled and named when you do PowerShell. So typically you'll import modules into your PowerShell to do things, to run against different things. But what this diagram really shows us is that no matter how you're coming at the ARM, basically the Azure Resource Manager, you're going to be going through the same endpoint. The same APIs are going to be used. So if I'm coming through the portal, or if I'm coming through PowerShell or the CLI, if I hit the REST client, which is actually a great way to do some administrative checks on your resources, is to run commands directly against the REST API to see if resources have been deployed with the settings you wanted. It's a really cool thing that you can do. But they all essentially translate down to an API call against the Azure Resource Manager, or basically that one endpoint to rule them all to go into your deployment. So even when we create, go ahead.
Sorry. This diagram's always tripped me up a little bit, just because they have the Azure portal so far away from Azure Resource Manager, when really they're in some way the same thing. It's just the portal itself is the graphical interface of Azure Resource Manager,
right,
rather than it being where PowerShell and CLI are using SDKs, or you're using REST clients to from Terraform and Ansible to get into Azure Resource Manager. When you're in the portal, you're essentially in Azure Resource Manager when you're doing stuff. So that's the one weird thing that I've always thought about this diagram.
Yeah, and it can be a little confusing too, because essentially that's what we're going to see though. If we went out to the portal and we tried to deploy a resource, we actually have the ability to just get the template from it, because that's what the portal is going to do. It's going to translate what you put into the portal into a template and execute it against the the Azure Resource Manager, right?
Exactly.
So, cool. And that's where we get into the actual Resource Manager templates, which is going to be a really cool way for us to be declarative about our environment. So where PowerShell is imperative, and what I mean by that is if I want to say deploy a VM and I want to use a PowerShell script, I typically have a script, a line in my script that says deploy, basically create my resource group, and then I use variables from that to say now I have a resource group, deploy into that resource group the VNet, and into that also put the subnet, and into that, and each one of these is an imperative command, which typically run one after the other in kind of almost like a top-down programmer type of way, and fairly not very often, if at all, would things run in parallel. So you're looking at an imperative step-by-step script, which is still repeatable and still usable and has a lot of great uses in many cases. But what the Resource Manager template does for us is it gives us this declarative syntax. So now, rather than me having to say, go do this, 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 I say, this is what I want. Azure, go make it happen.
No, very good, and that's very helpful. And anybody that has been in, like I said, in the Azure portal, as Brian was saying, you could go to any resource in there and get the framework of an ARM template right out of there and bring that into your Visual Studio Code and really build an infrastructure from that template by just changing certain parameters and declarative text in there.
Yeah, which is what we're actually going to see. So
exactly.
One other thing to point out, which we'll see here again as well, but you get the opportunity to have that repetitive nature of the template. So once we have it, we can run this thing and run it again and run it again. And it isn't necessarily called out in this Learn module, but there are two different types of deployments, which are complete and incremental. And 99% of your deployments are going to be incremental, meaning that we're not going to destroy things. So that means it's safe to run this against my resource group, and it won't destroy things that are out there that aren't necessarily defined in the resource or in the template. One caveat to that is if I, when we deploy this in a second here, we'll see as we deploy the, this template, if we make some changes and then run the template again, we could potentially lose some of those changes if they're not defined in the template. So our job is then to take those changes and say, oh, I tweaked the setting, I need to go modify the template to do that. So let's take a look at what it looks like to actually deploy an SAP instance in Azure. So I'm going to go ahead and run this video, and we have the opportunity to stop this if we need to, and keep it going if we need to as well. So just quickly do this. And so what we can see is as we run this, we're going to go out to the marketplace, and we're going to grab a prefab implementation of the SAP architecture, specifically with NetWeaver for SAP HANA. And you see that it gives you opportunities to choose what tiers you want. In this module, we go through, we take template tier 2, and it just gives a couple of things to call out. Like we need to, after we do this, we need to, install our SAP instances and or SAP instances, excuse me. And of course, one thing that's really important to call out here is that the template, it does have some requirements. So as we do that, we are going to be deploying VMs with requirements. And so if you use the medium and large templates, you may find that you need to get an increase of your subscription quota to get more cores in the region. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, I apologize that that keeps popping up from YouTube. I thought that wouldn't show. I apologize for that. So we're going to go ahead and create a new resource group here, and in there, ultimately, we're going to just create the SAP instance. We'll have the student username, and we'll give it a password, and we'll go ahead and give it this TST ID, and you see the different options for what level you want. We're going to do the demo, and I thought it was important to note that this only works if you only have to have a 3-character system ID. If it's not 3 uppercase letters, you'll get this error. So make sure that you're aware of that. If you're familiar with SAP, that probably makes sense.
That's a very interesting point. It's kind of like the storage account, only lowercase letters,
right?
And
right.
No dashes or anything like that.
3 to 24 letters only, and only if it's a storage account. So we definitely don't have that. So we'll just let this run here. But we're going to take Service Pack 5. You see that's using the E8s. implementation. We're going to go ahead and put this in the virtual network. If you wanted, you could edit the subnet, you could edit the virtual network, change your address ranges, things like that. What happens next is we end up getting this this deployment, but you see the option to view the automation template or just hit create. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the template. We're going to take a look at some of the things we just defined. You can download it to your machine, then you can deploy it from the portal or from your machine. And so in the module, it walks through looking at some of these parameters. So you can see here's the system ID with a default value of TST. Now we can still override a default value, but that will automatically fill in if we didn't do anything. There's our allowed values, which gives us the chance to say, hey, we can allow you to only use these types, so we can limit what someone could run. So what we'll see is we'll modify this one in a minute for the allowed values to remove the large option. And I just wanted to call out here again, the HANA size is defined as a default of the E4 there. Here's your address prefixes, here's your subnets. All of the stuff that you need are parameters that are going to go into that template. So again, download it locally so you can modify it locally, or just hit deploy and we're back in the deployment within the portal. So again, now we have to put in the non-provided parameters like the password that weren't there in order to do this, the different other things. But first, let's modify it. Let's go ahead and change some of these variables so that we can limit what options are available. For example, again, we could say, we don't necessarily want SP4, you could delete that. Here we're going to remove that large option so nobody could actually deploy a large, again, a cost control measure. Now they wouldn't accidentally deploy the most expensive version of this, and that prevents that from happening because it's not allowed. The template would fail if they tried to deploy it with something else.
Something real quick. You pointed out that these are E-series. That's a really key thing to note when we're talking about SAP HANA and an SAP on Azure deployment. That we are, we're definitely not using D-series like general use type of virtual machines. I think originally with SAP HANA deployments, SAP on Azure, when it was originally built, I believe that they even might have been M series that were the requirement. So they've dialed it down a little bit from an SAP perspective, but they definitely are requiring something a little bit higher. And I believe that it was even showing like an E8, so like an 8 core rather than a 2 or 4 core as well. These like I was saying before, the architecture is a high availability, high performance type of architecture that is really the standard that SAP requires to run on Azure, and that's what we're guiding you to, and what the marketplace deployment here is guiding us to.
Correct. And that will get us deployed out there with the ability to very easily have the right architecture in place. And then we can further do our SAP and HANA on top of that, right? So you get one last chance to review your settings here, make sure everything looks like what you thought it should be. Look for your key things there, make sure your subnets, all this stuff look good. Go ahead and hit create, and now we can deploy right from the portal. So of course, this would take about 5 to 10 minutes in the real world. Luckily, we're on super speed mode here, so we get to see it done right away, and we get to see that it does go ahead and deploy these resources into the resource group. So we get a network security group, we get a network interface card, a public IP, we get the VM, and about 9 disks that go along with this, along with the VNet in which all of this lives. So you can look at your connected devices, see that the NIC card is there. Here's your address space. You can see the subnet that we created. Again, if you had changed the name, you would see that there. There's all your disks. You can see all that. You can go in and make modifications. You can look at what your public IP address is here. So then you could use that to SSH to the machine. And so we'll do that in just a second here. But ultimately, first I want to show you this. This NSG gives me the ability to control, inbound and outbound IPs and different things. And so by default, this template does just let everybody in on 22, and that's a little bit of a security risk. So, we don't necessarily want anybody to be able to get in if they have that IP and maybe the right username and password. So you can actually go in here and further lock that down. So I just set it to only allow my IP so that we know that only my, on-prem IP or whatever I need is allowed to get into that machine. And it just feels a little more secure that way.
Or we set up Defender for server and do just-in-time VM access.
Yeah, or privileged identity, right?
or do a Bastion host. Yeah, for that matter.
Yeah, for sure. So here we're going to just SSH in. This is just going to prove it works. But it's also kind of cool to see once we're in, you can kind of take a look around at the directories And so if you look at what the SAP documentation says, we should have a system instance, we should have a shared installation path. So we can kind of look, and I made a little mistake here, but we'll get it corrected. Ultimately, we get the SAP instance there. You see there's nothing in it right now, but that's all set up. We see that we have a data log and shared folder. And if we look at the diagram here, there's our directories. So by default, this machine is set up and ready to go for the SAP instance. And so we just need to get it installed at that point. So the next part of this is just really looking at the fact that these are idempotent templates. Now I can go ahead and look at what I did, and I can see, hey, this is what I did. I actually need to redeploy this for some reason. Something got broken, something got configured. I just click on redeploy from a previous deployment, and my template is still there. It's going to be kept for a certain amount of time, and I can just make some tweaks there. If there were a couple things I wanted to change, rerun it. If the system's already there, then it will just say, hey, it's okay. But if it needed to tweak a setting or whatever, it would tweak it. So in this case, I didn't show this here, but the NSG would have lost that private IP restriction that I had. So moving forward, the other way to do things is to download it to your machine. So by default, the template had this blank user password in it. So I'm just cleaning that out here really quick. And you can see that it has the same setups. It has the allowed values. We take that large right back out. It has all the administration information for passwords, all of your different sizes. That's all in that same template because it's essentially the same template. So running it locally, I just set up the resource group I want to deploy to. I then go ahead and log into Azure. So I make sure that I have the right subscription by logging in and then checking my subscription. If I'm on the wrong subscription here, I need to use the AZ account set with the correct subscription ID or name. Change directory into the resource group or the folder with my template, and I just run a deployment group create. I can name it something different so I can see that this came from my machine, and ultimately using that same template with parameters here. Now the Learn module has this at parameters. That does throw a quick error, so I showed it here. Just remove that and just use the parameters.json file, and you'll see that then prompts for the admin password, since we stripped that out and made us be required here to be added in, and then it deploys. And once we have that, we go back out and we can see there's our example deployment and all of the resources that were deployed. You can look at this and to see these are what was deployed. You can check your inputs and your outputs to see what were the values that were sent in, other than things like the protected password, SSH key, things like that wouldn't be shown. And there's the template again. You can start all over. You can download it. You can redeploy it. All the things that you wanted to do before, you're able to do again. So cool.
Very nice. Very nice. Very very intuitive from that standpoint of being able to do that. Now you make it look very easy.
Well, that's the joy of a pre-recorded, right? I get to clean up all the mistakes. You don't have to watch me thumb through the typing. So this is just kind of a review a little bit, as well as a start to the introduction to where we're going to go next. So what you saw in that first one was an ARM template, or the Azure Resource Manager Templates, which is the kind of the first-class citizen of Azure, right? And what we don't show in this module, but I would love you to be aware of, is Bicep. So Bicep is essentially the newer way to do template deployments in Azure. And if you've never done an Azure or an ARM template, and if you were training with me, I would tell you I'd recommend to start with Bicep, because it is much more intuitive, which actually then leads us to Terraform, because Bicep and Terraform are extremely similar in how they deploy resources. So what we're going to do is kind of take a look at Terraform next, and give us a chance to see how we might use that in our deployments. So I guess real quick, just making sure we didn't miss anything here. We had, all the things we did there. We made sure the template was validated. We were able to review it. We were able to edit it. We were able to download it. We can generate it from deployments. We can also generate it from resources. You can go into the portal, kind of click through things and say, yeah, I wanted to do this, which is kind of what we did when we started. Rather than actually just hitting create, we started with the template. So yeah, so moving into Terraform then. Dwayne, have you had a chance to work with Terraform at all?
I have not played a whole lot with Terraform. I've been in multiple companies that use Terraform. I know that that people love Terraform, and it is especially if they are working in different platforms, not just Azure, that it allows some flexibility there to deploy in multiple types of hyperscaler environments. Though there are some specific it's not like you build a Terraform template and that can be used on Azure and AWS and Google. You have to build specific templates for each one of them, from my understanding. And isn't that correct, Brian?
That is an awesome, awesome call out. So I love it because a lot of people say that Terraform is cloud agnostic. And in some ways it is. I mean, you can use it in Amazon, you can use it in Azure. So if your team is multi-cloud, or if you have skill in Terraform, there's really no reason not to use it in Azure, right? It's going to work in Azure just like anything else. And in fact, if that's what your team knows, then go for it. Do it. I mean, don't make your team learn something new. But if you're only specifically to Azure and you haven't worked with anything, again, I would recommend starting with Bicep or ARM, just because those are the first class citizens. But if you know you might have a multi-cloud strategy in play, especially a lot of people in this ecosystem of SAP and HANA might be multi-cloud, or might be Java and .NET, and not just and not that you can't use Java and .NET in Azure, but you may have some a lot of pans on irons in the fire, right? So even though it's cloud agnostic, in which way I can deploy to Azure or Amazon, like Dwayne said, it has to be tweaked for each one. So it's not just the same exact template runs in both. So don't.
I mean, they're ultimately using different languages in a way, right?
Right.
It's kind of like speaking English and French and German from that aspect. They're saying the same thing, but they're saying it in different ways, right?
Right.
I mean, that's really what we're talking about. So you can, if you can translate it, and like you said, if you know the Terraform language, you could probably very easily translate it between each of the three if you work in each of the three ultimately at that point.
Right. Yeah. So what we're going to see with Terraform is that we do have the ability to do the same thing we did with the ARM template. So we're going to back it off a little bit. We're not going to do quite the same amount of level of stuff. We're going to just show what it looks like to do a Terraform deployment in Azure for a VM. But one of the things that's important to call out with Terraform, so with Bicep or an ARM template, the state of the resource group isn't necessarily managed by my template, meaning that if I run the Bicep template, Azure's taking care of, well, this resource doesn't exist, let's create it, or this resource has this setting, we need to tweak it. Azure's going to take care of all of that. What you'll see a little difference with Terraform is that it has kind of a state file that it needs to be managed. And so ultimately you have these commands that you run. So you run an init command to get started. You run this plan. And what that plan does is kind of says, oh, this is what you currently have. This is what we need to do. And you can see, oh, this is what we will do if we're going to deploy. And then you actually run the apply statement to deploy it. And basically the destroy command is just used to do the opposite. And what we'll see is that in order to do a destroy, we also have to run the plan again, because that state has to be managed a little bit more by you. So that's one kind of callback to Terraform that's a little different than Azure and Bicep and Azure ARM templates, where I could just push play and it goes and it figures that out for me. I mean, Terraform's figuring it out for you. You just have to make sure to say, hey, first let's figure it out, now let's run it. So it's just a two-step process versus a one-step process, essentially. So let's take a look at what that looks like, and we'll get the video started here. So this Terraform deployment is going to run against Azure. So I typed in shell.azure.com, and it gives me the full screen. So I'm able to go ahead and just run right here in the Azure shell. One thing we didn't call out was that you'll, let me just pause this for a second and apologize again for all the crazy videos down there. But when we're working in the Cloud Shell with Terraform here, we're going to be able to run the commands right under my own profile. If I was doing this from a build machine or build box, I would want to have a service principal, which is the recommended way for deploying. So you would build out your service principal and you would actually log in as that person, not as you. But since I'm in the Cloud Shell, or if I'm running from my local machine and I log in as me, I have all my federated credentials. So I don't have to worry about any of that stuff.
And where's Terraform ultimately located? Is it a cloud-based platform that's just that we're pulling through a REST API within the Cloud Shell? Like how are you able to use the Cloud Shell for Terraform?
So the Cloud Shell has Terraform and Ansible pre-installed. So
Okay.
it's able to just work. I don't have to do
Gotcha.
anything to configure it. I just created the main TF file here, which is the Terraform file, and you see that what we've done is added in a resource group. So we're going to create a resource group. We'll name it the 𝗦𝗽𝗲VRM resource group. And Bicep works very similar to Terraform. So what you see here, you'll see kind of this naming structure where you have this Azure RM resource group is kind of what it's trying to run, 𝗦𝗽𝗲VRM group, and then ultimately this name. And that's going to be really key. We'll see here in a second to leverage in future modules that then trigger off of this one. So that you have the ability to say, this is my resource group. It's in the East US, and these are the tags I want on it. And it's a really simple thing to do to get that out into Terraform. So you run the Terraform init again to get started, and that creates kind of that initializing state where it gets a Terraform ready to go, and ultimately, creates this lock file and gets your provider plugins all installed. We're ready to go. So then we do the Terraform plan, which basically gives us the ability to create this TF plan file. And so Terraform plan -out Terraform _plan.tf plan is what I'm running here. And that ultimately gives me that file. And you can review then what's going to be done when we do this. So you see there's 1 add, 0 to change, 0 to destroy. It's going to create this resource group. And so it tells me exactly what it's going to do. That's essentially what the plan is going to do. And I check it, looks like what I want. So now I can run it, right? So now I do the Terraform apply, and we can get this thing deployed into our environment. So again, we just apply that plan file then, and once it runs, now we'll have a resource group. So we can go out and we can look at our different resource groups there. You can see there's the resource group. It was deployed to the East US just like we wanted it to be done. And in fact, we could even just run a Cloud Shell command or an AZ CLI command to say, here's what my group is. So you can see, check it right there. Bam, there's my group. So I know it's there. So this is the destroy. So now I say, well, I actually didn't want that. I want to tear it down. So I'm going to do the plan and just on the destroy, and then it creates the destroy.tf plan. 0 to add, 0 to change, and 1 to destroy. Tells me what it's going to be destroyed there in the nice red color. If you're able to see the red, ultimately, then you can see that. And we run it again. Terraform apply the Terraform plan.destroy.tf plan, and now the resource group is gone. Again, you see this one takes a little more time. We're talking 40, 50 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever it took here. Luckily, we have time travel going on right now, but ultimately you can see then that this will clear out and delete that Terraform or that group we had. So it still shows up in my portal for a second. So I end up going back off the page for a second, come back in, and it says, oh, it's gone, right? So it did get destroyed like we expected. So the next part of this, again, this goes along with the module. So if you're like, this is going really fast, I don't know what's happening, please know that all of this is covered in the module step by step, and you can go back to the module and you can review that yourself. So here we're just able to tweak address spaces, the name of the subnet, different things we want there. But this is what I wanted to call out. The Terraform group name, again, goes back to everything we have here. The Azure Resource Group .myTerraform Group .myTerraform Resource Group is exactly what we see in this resource group name. So that's how this module knows, hey, number one, I have to actually wait for that one to get deployed, and number two, this is where I'm going to live in that resource group. So we're going to create the Terraform network here. Again, we can put tags on it. We can do all the other things we want to do there. And then we have a subnet. So part 4 is a subnet. This is also going to be in the resource group, but it's also dependent now on the virtual network, following that same syntax of looking at what the previous module was called. And so ultimately, rather than running in parallel, when we have a dependency like that, it knows, oh, I can't run until the VNet's deployed, which makes sense. I can't have a subnet without a VNet. Mm-hmm. So that's how it makes sure not to run in parallel. Because where we were talking about imperative before, the PowerShell commands will run, one after the other. The template will try to run all of them at once if it can. But when we put those resource allocations in place like that, we see that it gives us a chance to be dependent on the other one, so we can't go until it's ready. So that's a public IP. Obviously, for the VM, we're going to need a public IP in order to get in. So this is going to be the network security group. Again, this is what defined all those east-west rules, the lateral rules into the network, inbound and outbound, essentially for that. So you can give it a different priority. You can set, allow or deny. You can do different protocols, different source port ranges. So again, this is the SSH protocol we want to let people in. And if you wanted to say not everybody, again, you would put your own IP address right here and say, I don't want you coming to this VM unless you are from an approved IP range, right? So then the security group has to be associated to, or the network interface basically has to be created to give it the IP. It has to be associated to the network security group so that the VM knows, hey, these are the security rules that are applied to me. So we create that association for the network card, and that's ultimately the private IP associated to that Terraform group, resource group inside the VM, inside the subnet, and everybody's happy because now we can get to it if we have our rules applied for port 22. And then the boot diagnostics. So this needs a random ID since storage accounts are pretty picky, as Dwayne called out earlier. So we want to make sure that we have something that's kind of unique. So we're going to use this random ID function. So you can see you can use functions within Terraform. You can do the same thing in Bicep or ARM, but all of these have the ability to run these specific functions to do different things like get string length, get different string random IDs or unique IDs. So you don't have to try to like figure out, well, if I try to run this again in a different resource group or in a different subscription, will it be blocked because I use the same same storage account name? No, because I use this unique random generator, and now it's good. So this is just more information about how it's going to generate the computer, the user, the Azure user with an SSH key, essentially going to be created. And it's, again, I'm running from the Cloud Shell. All this stuff is kind of stored locally in my own stuff, so it's pretty easy. Once I get the Terraform init, Terraform plan, Terraform apply, we can get this stuff going. So
one thing I did notice when you were going through those steps and everything while this is running, I noticed it was using a D-series virtual machine. So obviously this is just giving an example of how to use Terraform, not necessarily a standardized SAP deployment. So if you're kind of using this Terraform structure for SAP, you're going to have to go back and look at the reference architecture and what the requirements are rather than using this verbatim, right?
Correct. Yeah. So this is just our starter template, and you'll want to tweak that. Like, that's a great call out, So we want to make sure we're using the right level of disks, so we only create one disk. Do we need 9 disks? Do we need to do that? Yeah, probably. Right. So we need to make sure that we add those to our template. It's not just going to be cookie cutter sometimes, but you may be able to find some Azure examples as well. At GitHub, there's a lot of template examples, so you can find those. So again, once we have this machine deployed through our template, we can see it's very easy to get in. I just goofed around, said, yeah, look, I'm on a Linux box, neat. It proved that it was actually working, kind of doing what I thought it should do. And you can see that, like you said, the standard DS1 was done. The network interface card, the SSH open to everybody, as we talked about earlier. All that was defined in the template, and it created it the way that I wanted it to.
All right.
Yeah. So again, destroying, same type of thing. We plan the destruction. And then we say, okay, now there's 11 to destroy, and ultimately following along with the module here. Obviously, if we're just learning things, we want to clean up after ourselves. So we're just making sure we don't leave something behind that's going to cost us money. That's what this does, is it goes ahead and basically cleans it up. So
very good. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, Terraform, obviously, yeah, lots of steps, lots of plan. I always talk about planning processes and making sure you're planning properly. And Terraform kind of forces you to do such a thing. So moving along, Brian, we're starting to run out of time a little bit. Let's,
sure.
I know we have finally to finish off Ansible, which is another open source that runs. That's a Red Hat open source platform. That's another deployment tool. Obviously, we found you found in particular some particular challenges in the Ansible module that you worked through. But if we want to go through that quick, so that we can wrap this up, sure, and do our knowledge checks here at the end, that'd be great. So, sure. Yeah, I mean, all of the text and everything in terms of the Ansible modules and components, everybody, you can find this on the Learn module, but obviously, it's got its own particulars around how it's designed and, its control plane and infrastructure aspect of things for deploying. So, so again, those are things that you can read on Microsoft Learn. But let's get into the actual exercise and let's show how this works and show how you got Ansible working and what some of the gotchas were that you found while you were doing this.
Sure. So essentially, we're going to create a playbook and we're going to run it. It uses YAML. And so if you're not familiar with YAML, it's another markup language, right? And so YAML ain't markup language, whatever. But ultimately, we're going to create the different playbook. This is how you can run it: Ansible-playbook create VM.yaml. It is installed in Azure to begin with. There's some samples out there at GitHub, again, on the Azure samples for Ansible playbooks, excuse me, that you can find this create Azure VM. Also, that's right in the module. What you can see is here's how you can get to it. For that. And then ultimately, I wanted to throw in there's additional training at Azure DevOps Labs on Ansible if you're interested in that. So make sure you check that out. And then ultimately, we're going to run this in the cloud. Now, there was, as Dwayne said, an issue. And most people that I've actually everybody I've talked to ran into this, and I ran into it on multiple subscriptions. So I'm anticipating most of you will as well. Ultimately, you need to run these 3 commands in order to get your installation to work from the Cloud Shell by default. Now, you might not be using it from the Cloud Shell. You might be using it from build machine. So again, once we do that, we're going to get these packages. We're going to get all installed. We're going to get that on our machine. So we're going to see that right here and see how that all works. So ultimately, we're going to go into the Cloud Shell, and we're just going to quickly create this sample playbook in the code editor. And again, these commands are going to be just like Terraform or the ARM template. We can rerun these over and over again. So we have this resource group, which we end up calling, it needs to be called my resource group. We do that. We try to run the playbook that we just copied and pasted in here, and we get this error that says can't resolve the RM resource group. Basically, the packages aren't there. So that's when we need to run these 3 commands to quickly restore. So the Galaxy collection install the Azure AZ collection with a force allows it to basically reinstall that into our Cloud Shell. And once we do that, you run this wget to essentially get that requirements.azure.txt file, which lists out all those packages we saw just really briefly a second ago. And then you just pip install those requirements, and that basically gets your Cloud Shell up to speed to run Ansible. So if you see that error, it's not unexpected. Just get those 3 commands run, and you'll be golden. And then once you have those, we need an SSH key. So I decided to do this one in the portal. We could have easily done this in the command line as well. We're just going to get the SSH key, which gives us a chance to quickly and easily create it in our resource. You can download it here because this is the last chance you'll see the private key. Once you do all that, you can go out. You can get the public key here because we need this public key in order to deploy the VM. So we're going to go ahead and deploy that. And what you'll see is we just drop that in there, delete the generated by Azure part, and then we can run our playbook. At this point, then everything will be installed, and the playbook would create that VM just like we'd expect. A couple of other caveats, as Dwayne was mentioning earlier, this is a little bit older of a VM type of deployment. So the standard DS1 obviously not necessarily up to speed for the SAP instance. Well, we'll see when this is deployed as well. It actually isn't even using managed disks from that default template, and what that means is that the disk is independently managed by us. We don't really want that. So even in the portal, when we look at this in a second, you'll see kind of the warning, and it'll say, hey, let's migrate this to the newer managed disk. We recommend that. So if you see that up here at the top, that's what this is all about. But ultimately, it's easily created. We have our creation. We got our public IP address, and that's essentially what we need to do. So that basically brings us to the end. So it is time to do our knowledge.
Yeah, let's see how well everybody was listening to us throughout here, Brian. So you can go to aka.ms polls-h, or you can use the QR code to ask your questions. So if you want to do that now, we'll give you a few seconds. I know there's a lag in terms of you hearing us versus you acting on it. So we'll give a couple minutes here for everybody to answer the questions here. We've got I think 3 questions. I think we can certainly get through these in the next 6 minutes and close things out. So
yeah. All right. So what does it mean the templates are idempotent? Such a computer science term.
That is such a computer science term. I had to actually look that term up, to be honest with you.
Nice.
It seemed like a misspelling myself.
Oh no! So this is just really funny how many times idempotent has actually come up in my world in the last 2 weeks. And one of the reasons it came up is because not many people like when you're putting it into documentation, do a lot of people know what idempotent means? And then do we need to elaborate on that? Well, this question actually does it, right? So the answer, are we ready?
I think we're probably as ready as we would be.
Okay, here we go. The answer is C. The same template can be deployed many times. It gives the same resource types in the same state. And you'll see the same term of idempotent when we're talking about SQL Server running queries. You know, if I want to make a store procedure, I need it to be idempotent to do the same thing every time. As long as I give it the same inputs, it gives me the same outputs. The same thing with our templates. They're idempotent, meaning the same one can be run and it's safe to do without really much fear of anything going horribly wrong.
And that's obviously a great thing to to not think that you're going to like blow something away.
Right.
So
there's nothing worse than that got pulled over by the cops feeling in your stomach when you put something into production. And these templates can totally make that not happen for me. So I'm very happy about that.
It's your get out of jail free card.
Right. And I mean, obviously we need to be aware of what we're deploying and we need to be in control of it, and we need to understand how to fix it if we do something wrong, but it does give a lot of relief and off the and the automation part of it now. Like I don't have to worry about the order of me deploying things and making sure that if I lock something down on a VM, it's going to get available, right? Boom, this template takes care of that for me.
Very, very good. Yeah, we're on question 2, so hopefully everybody, while Brian and I were bantering about getting pulled over by the police and things like that, you started on question 2. Hit the QR code again to answer the question around which of the following is one of the 4 basic Terraform commands used when creating and applying a Terraform execution plan to a cloud infrastructure. And if you're paying close enough attention, you might find the answer in the stem, right?
Dwayne, don't teach people how to cheat the test. Right? All right. Well, let's go ahead and it's apply. I never would have guessed. No, I'm just kidding. But, yeah. That's awesome.
Little
Dwayne,
exam tip, little test taking tip when you're looking at a stem, try and find the keywords that might help you to the right answer.
Nice.
All right. Last one. Everybody did do pretty well on that one. They did have their answers locked in before I did give them that little life hack. Nice. So everybody did pretty well on that. So let's hit the last one here. When running an Ansible playbook to configure a multiple server solution, such as with 5 VMs in a network, how many servers need to install Ansible?
So this isn't fair. It isn't fair because we zoomed right over the slide where we talked about this one.
We did kind of, yeah.
So we'll give it maybe 10 more seconds or so, 15 seconds for people to kind of lock in your answers. Take a good old guess.
Their guessing is pretty good. I'll tell you that right now. I'm looking at.
Well, you got a 33% chance. So, but yeah, no. So we did actually kind of skim over this one, and again, in the Learn module, it explains this more. But essentially, you need when you're looking at deploying to the Ansible, you kind of need one controller node, right? And once you have that, it can run kind of like the pool nodes, and so that's all you really need is get it installed in one place.
That was probably noted in that one diagram that we zipped through, I would assume.
Oh, it was.
I think that's probably where it was when it was talking about the control plane and all of that in there. So we did zip through that one quick just so we could get through the demo and stay in under time because that was our last question and our last and one of our last slides. So
and is this really the end of Ignite? Is it really over or can I do more?
I think it's about over at this point. I believe this is the end. And there is one more day for tomorrow in person. It says.
Quick, get on a plane.
Maybe there is some on demand. Maybe there's some on demand. Online sessions are done. So okay. We are the last online session probably because local time in Seattle it's 6 o'clock right now. So so everybody's at the bar already probably in Seattle. But
Ankitta saying we got a live session tomorrow
SAP
for SAP.
Session. Very
cool. Breakout.
A breakout session. Okay.
Turn off the lights.
Yeah. Turn the lights off on your way out. But yeah, hopefully everybody enjoyed this session. Brian, you did an amazing job on the demos, so thank you for all of your hard work there, showing everybody in fast motion how things can go. In using the flex capacitor and driving fast. Hitting that 200 miles per hour to go through those. So we appreciate that, everybody. Additional resources. If you want to go to the next slide, Brian, I think there's a QR code to get to additional resources around SAP. And again, the Learn Live, the Learn session is out there. And again, that's on the next slide. And if you want to go to the last slide, that is the QR code for the entire series of Learn Live in the session catalog. If you want to pull it up, this will do a quick search and allow you to add it all to your backpack and watch it even after tomorrow, in the next week. Maybe during your Thanksgiving holiday, you can pull it up with your family if you're in the U.S. and watch it between football games and things like that. So
right. During commercial breaks.
Yeah, during the long commercial breaks or the extra long halftime shows.
Nice. All right.
Yeah,
well,
thanks
everybody.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And thanks a lot, Brian. As always, a pleasure chatting with you and doing this stuff with you. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Great night.